All right, so we're going to be responding to Dr. Sinan Ciddi. He is the senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, aka FDD, and director of FDD's Turkey program, where he breaks down the rapidly escalating tensions between Turkey and Israel, Erdogan's ambitions, Turkey's growing military presence in Syria, and Ankara's extensive relationship with Hamas. Let's get right into it.
Turkey's intelligence capabilities, illicit finance monitoring capabilities are not infantile. They very much have the capability. So I would say it's definitely with the blessing of the Turkish government. I have seen a study that identifies approximately 30 Turkish-owned charities operating in Israel, across Israel. Right. And these 30 that I've seen, just these 30, all have ties to illicit terrorism financing. Turkey is the single biggest financing node for Hamas's operations inside of Gaza in the world.
Today, I'm joined by Dr. Sinan Ciddi, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and Director of FDD's Turkey program. Sinan has spent more than 2 decades studying Turkish domestic politics and foreign policy. He's also an associate professor of national security studies at Marine Corps University and teaches at Georgetown University's School of Foreign Service. And this conversation comes at an extraordinary moment. Israel and Turkey are now confronting each other over Syria. Ankara maintains deep ties with Hamas. Turkey has entered a new defense alignment with Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. And President Erdogan is expanding Turkish military, political, and economic influence across the region. So today, I want to understand where this confrontation is heading and ask a much bigger question. Is Erdogan transforming Turkey from a difficult NATO ally into Israel's next major strategic adversary? Sinan, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. This is quite an extraordinary time.
Truly. Sinan, you recently said Israel and Turkey are very close to a significant escalation. After Israel's strike on the Abu al-Daghur air base in Syria, is this exactly what you were warning about?
I think it's one of the sort of nodes that helps me sort of put that perspective out there. I just saw this morning that the Israeli government's spokesman, or the spokesman for the Israeli prime minister, put out an official video analyzing this strike of this airbase in northwestern Syria near Aleppo. And to my knowledge, this is the first time that the state of Israel has referred to Turkey as an enemy state. And that's quite a significant development. That's not just, people may just assume, yeah, but I mean, the Netanyahu government in Israel considers Turkey an enemy. That may be in sort of the vernacular, but as an official statement, that is something that Israel has really resisted very hard in using as a term to define Turkey, because Turkey is a significant and major NATO ally of the United States. And certainly, I would say, the most significant contributing country to NATO outside of the United States. And Israel has shied away from essentially determining Turkey as an enemy state. But at this point, I think, no, they're not holding their punches anymore, simply because the Turks under Erdogan are not essentially stopping this process of escalation. We've seen this sort of back and forth, I've seen on social media, in the mainstream press, both broadcast and digital, saying, well, the Israelis are escalating, and the Israelis are, want a weak Syria. They want to trample upon the whole region. They're really raising tensions against Turkey. I think that is a misnomer, right? And I really think people should take a step back and stop with what I would refer to as their Israel derangement syndrome for a while, and just say, take a look at the Turkey file, right? Turkey's activities and escalatory moves towards Israel is not new. It did not start yesterday. It did not start last week, last year, or just after October 7th. It started back in 2008. Erdogan, since 2008, systematically has done everything to isolate, undermine, and delegitimize Israel in the minds of Turks. And this is not coincidental. It's not just something he woke up to, but this has been a long dream of his, going back to his earliest days as a politician, when he was nurtured in Turkey's political Islamist movement.
Erdogan has been planning to fight with Israel for years because Erdogan wants to return Turkey back to the Ottoman Empire days, the same way Putin wants to turn Russia back to the Soviet days. Israel gets in the way of that, both religiously, it undermines the Islamic caliphate, and it harms the idea of an Islamic empire. Israel is the strongest country in the region, and that is not what the Muslim world wants. Some have come to terms with it, and rightly so. It's smart of them to do so, such as the Gulf states, some of them. But yet, Turkey is playing this slow, calculated game, right? It's part of NATO. It wants to be, wants to have a relationship with the West, but then in the Middle East, it really doesn't like the idea of Israel having that much power. So that's how that works, and this Dr. Ciddi understands that.
He just does not have an interest in maintaining robust or even cordial ties with the Israelis. What he has in mind is a means to undermine, isolate, and see, in my opinion, a meaningful destruction of the state of Israel, such that he is able to dominate a significant amount of political or geostrategic real estate in the region.
Now, Israel says that Syria was preparing to allow a significant Turkish military presence at Abu al-Dahur. Turkey and Syria obviously dispute that account, but what do you believe Turkey was actually planning to do there, and how is Turkey using Syria for their own motives?
Yeah, that's a great question. We actually don't know yet because we've had no official statement in terms of what specifically the Turks were intending to do with that airbase. Were they seeking to put Turkish warplanes in there as they had been proposing to do in another airbase which the Israelis bombed back in 2025, which it was in the middle of Syria or close to the middle of Syria, the Palmyra and T4 air bases, where the Turks were thinking of positioning F-16 fighters, which the Israelis basically said doesn't work for us. But in this case, we actually don't know what they were going to position. And my suspicion is, I don't have hard evidence for this, but my speculation is whatever the Turks were going to put in there, whether it was sensitive military equipment, which is what Axios reported, whether it was intelligence capabilities, significant munitions, I don't know what it was. My speculation is that it was disturbing enough for the Israelis and embarrassing enough for the Turks not to disclose. Because the Turks would not want their dirty laundry aired in saying this is what the Turks were being willing to position there. And the Israelis are not going to reveal sources and methods as to what they destroyed and why they destroyed it. And essentially, we just left it with guesswork. But I would underline this. The Israelis and the Syrians reached an accommodation and understanding that the Syrian government would not permit any military buildup inside of Syria, which was going to be perceived as a military threat to Syria. They warned the Syrians, saying, "Please don't allow the Turks to do and install whatever they are proposing to put in this base." But they obviously didn't listen. And at this point, the Israelis are just saying, "Well, look, we had an agreement. We've communicated this to the Syrian government. We tried to communicate it to the Turkish government. Everybody proceeded anyway, and for that, what's left to us is to essentially take action because they're not listening, and we're just not going to countenance a significant military capability buildup inside of Syria, which could be used against us in the future." And that's the Israeli position, and the Turks don't want to listen to it.
So, like you said, Israel established a very clear red line. Do you think Erdogan was trying to test Israel to see whether they would actually enforce that red line?
Yeah, possibly. I mean, look, the Turks, are right now on this sort of media blitz and narrative, and this is where the Israeli side is really sort of, unfortunately, on a backpedal. They're having trouble countering this narrative that the Turks are putting out. Saying what the Turkish narrative is saying is, look, the Netanyahu government bombed this airstrip in a bid to escalate tensions with Turkey, simply because Netanyahu is running for re-election in October, and he needs something to essentially fearmonger and scare Israelis at home to say, look, there's a big bad boogeyman, and that's why he did it. And the other reason what they cite is that the Israelis are not interested in having stable and strong state neighbors around them. They want to have sort of weaker and dismembered sort of state entities so that Israel can dominate the region. I don't think that's true either. But the biggest lie the biggest line that they seem to have jumped on the Turks, which is resonating, unfortunately, with audiences, saying, regardless of what anyone thinks, the Turkish government and the Turkish military have been invited into Syria to conduct training, assistance, reconstruction efforts of the Syrian military, whereas the Israelis have not. Okay, that happens to be actually true on paper. That's fundamentally true. I mean, the Syrians are uncomfortable with the Israeli military presence inside their borders. I would say two things. One is the Syrians are not exactly too jazzed about having the Turkish military do whatever they want and have undue influence inside of Syria. We know this because Syrian social media channels, personalities are very much active saying, you know, we have this partnership with the Turks, but all they seem to be doing is landing us in trouble with the Israelis, which then ends up in some sort of military strike against our territory. And we need to limit Turkish influence inside of Syria. There is that narrative that's been the second biggest one is like, which is where I call Turkish hypocrisy out, is, well, the Turks didn't wait for permission from the Syrian government during the civil war to militarily invade the country 3 times in 3 major military offensives inside of Syria, citing terrorism concerns emanating out of there. And they certainly didn't ask the permission of the then Syria government under Assad to occupy significant parts of northwestern Syria, which they still do. So the narrative seems to be if the Turks say, well, I have national security concerns, then I can go into Syria when and in a fashion that I deem fit. But the Israelis can never do that. That just doesn't seem to me reasonable to me.
Let's say the next Israeli strike kills Turkish soldiers. What does Erdogan do? Could he politically afford to absorb Turkish military casualties caused by Israel without retaliating?
Yeah, look, this is where it becomes really problematic. I think since the strike on that airbase a few days ago, I have not heard Erdogan say anything significant. I mean, and I think he's going to come out and say something. And when it does, it's going to be harsh and verbally sort of, a verbal diatribe. If there is more heated exchange or exchanges of this kind in terms of what we just saw in the airbase, but instead, as you suggest, we have Turkish casualties, then I think the gloves come off. Erdogan, whether he wants to do it or not, engage in military escalation, armed conflict with the Israelis, he will be under tremendous public pressure at this point to act militarily against Israel. But that is a pressure point that he has built up, right? I would also say, when people say, well, the Israelis have just been as escalatory in heated rhetoric against Turkey as the Turks, I was like, at this point, I'm like, well, that's fine. That's an opinion you have. But please understand this. The Israelis since October 7, have been trying very hard to sort of understand how a man such as Erdogan can never take ownership of his sort of vile rhetoric that's also anti-Western, not just anti-Israeli or anti-Semitic, but it also has been consistently anti-Western for over a decade, right? And he's been driving a narrative that calls for the destruction of Israel. He's called for essentially the rising up of Muslim countries to essentially, take down Israel, and wants to spearhead, I would argue, a sort of messianic cause to really sort of underwrite the jihadist dream of eliminating the state of Israel. And he's referred to this, Israelis as genocidal. He's referred to the Israeli government as Nazi-esque, right? And the Israelis, since in each of these sort of exchanges, have been remarkably measured. And if that's just a rhetorical part. There is also Turkey being the single biggest benefactor of Hamas.
All right, well, this wraps up this video about Turkey and Israel. Will they go to war? I think, of course, anything's on the table, but I don't see it happening anytime soon. I definitely hope it doesn't happen. I hope that they stay out of each other's business. But I definitely think Erdogan would love to see Israel destroyed if he could. If he doesn't have to personally get involved, he'd love to see it happen by some other country like Iran. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Like, subscribe, and share. Support the channel via the Buy Me a Coffee link in the pinned comment or description. You can send a Zelle as well. And you can follow me, Rafi the Realtor, on Instagram for all of your South Florida real estate needs. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, peace.